Welcome to the Building Web3 Podcast. I'm my good friend, Luis. He is the founder at Gelato. So we have a very exciting episode. We're going to go all into the ABC stack. So if you've been following modular blockchains and all the things we've been doing on the podcast, this is something you definitely don't want to miss. So we're going to take you from beginner to expert in this episode. So real quick, Luis, tell us what is the exciting news about the ABC stack, and then we'll go all into what that even means.
Thanks, Jax. Very nice to be here on the pod with you. So the ABC stack is the first EVM. It's the first of many things, but I think most importantly, it is the first EVM rollup stack that broke the Gigagas barrier. And I'm not sure, like, you have to be a bit tuned into the rollup space, probably a bit technical and devy to understand what I'm talking about. But essentially, what that means is most of you will be familiar with the TPS, the transaction per second metric. But as developers in the last year, the community has sort of decided to not focus so much attention on that metric because it is a bit, it has some pitfalls. A transaction isn't made equal. And a better metric to track performance of a chain, and here we're talking about rollup chains specifically, but this could also be a non-rollup chain, an EVM chain, is the gas per second. And that is a way better sort of telling metric to measure compute performance of these execution stacks. So it's a better way of sort of describing how much, essentially how much gas it can process in a second, which roughly then translates to how many compute operations it can do. I sometimes say you could liken gigagas per second to gigahertz per second, which is the standard metric to measure a CPU performance, as you know. So I would sort of say gigagas per second is basically our version of gigahertz per second to measure blockchain compute performance. And there currently, I don't even know the numbers on top of my head. You should check out this website, gigagas.live, like not like live stream, but more like life, the life that we live in. So there you will see what Ethereum is doing and what Base is doing and so on. But I would say they hover around, like somewhere around a couple of megagas per second, maybe less. And Gigagas is like 1,000x better than that. And I think the recent inventions on recent developments in the rollup space with experimental sequencers have seen something like maybe 60 megagas at heights, but Gigagas is still almost 20x better than that, right? And actually, Base themselves have as their technical North Star to reach 1 gigagas in like 2 years, roughly speaking. And I mean, with ABC Stack, we already achieved it internally, as the meme goes, like 2 months ago. And now it's out there. You can deploy it on Gelato, Rollup-as-a-Service. You can get an ABC testnet and you can crank it up and reach that Gigagas zone. And what that means is you can just fit so much more throughput on a chain. You can build applications that you didn't or weren't able to build before on chain in abundance. We say build everything on chain. And so that's the first sort of thing that you should know about ABC Stack. And ABC here, of course, stands for Abundance. Abundance is the general brand behind the stack that we created. And the other thing that is first equally, if not even more important, is that it is not an Ethereum layer 2 stack. Most people nowadays, they would think that a rollup is a layer 2, and maybe by extension, they would think, oh, rollup is an Ethereum layer 2. That is very misguided. It comes from, of course, the Ethereum research teams being behind most of the sort of rollup developments in the last 4 or 5 years. But there has been one team that are at the forefront, which really, I think, are pushing the envelope and are really, pushing the edge here, which is, of course, the Celestia team. Celestia started in 2019 as Lazy Ledger. I believe that John Adler, one of their co-founders, was one of the first people to even coin the term rollup, if I'm not mistaken. And Celestia, of course, is also being used as a data availability layer by some of the Ethereum rollups. But they very early on, like 2 years ago, already pioneered the concept of a sovereign rollup. Now that's that stuff gets a bit confusing. But ultimately, the way I can save you months of like confusion here, because I went through it all, and I can now, I think, articulate it more succinctly what the hell that means. I think the most important thing to understand about the sovereign rollup architecture is that this is not an Ethereum L2, or in general, it is not a layer 2 in the conventional sense of what that means. Now, what is a layer 2? I would say colloquially, like every day, people use layer 2 to refer to a rollup that has a trust minimized enshrined bridge, a rollup bridge to Ethereum. Sometimes this is called like then a settled rollup because it has this bridge that settles to Ethereum. That was the whole point of the rollup research that the Ethereum folks did. It was basically, how can we give someone a chain, like a side chain, if you will, like a rollup, and that still has this very secure, trust minimized connection to its parent chain, Ethereum. And so came the layer 2 rollup bridges, which nowadays come in two flavors: the optimistic ones with fraud proofs like OP Stack and Arbitrum, and then ZK ones like Polygon CDK or ZK Stack or Scroll, I suppose, of which I have to say the ZK EVMs, I think they, at this stage at least, sort of failed. They definitely have to reinvent themselves. And there's new kids on the block trying to do ZK rollups now with succinct and risk zero type 1 proving architectures. But yeah, essentially layer 2 just means that this is a very specific implementation of a rollup, one that enshrines a very specific bridge to the parent chain, the settlement chain. So this is just a very specific way to do a rollup. What Celestia has pioneered is the concept of a sovereign rollup. This is not a layer 2 in the traditional sense. It is, first of all, what is a rollup? A rollup is simply a chain that posts its blocks to another chain. For people who are familiar with the web cloud space with AWS and so on, you can think of this as a virtual server. Similarly to how a virtual server uses another server, a host machine, a rollup is like a virtual blockchain that uses another blockchain, the L1, like Celestia, for data availability and consensus. That's why Celestia started as lazy ledger. They just sort of stripped away the EVM and smart contracting and said, what does a blockchain do as its core? Again, another pitfall. Nowadays, most people are acquainted with Ethereum. They think, oh, a blockchain is a smart contract platform that does EVM execution. No, it's not, right? Like Ethereum actually was the first smart contracting platform, but blockchains existed before Ethereum. And blockchains do very different things than smart contracting and execution. Blockchains simply just provide a decentralized, irreversible consensus over an ordered list of transactions from Genesis to wherever the blockchain is, right? So that's what a blockchain does, and Celestia specializes in that problem. It provides you with the consensus ordering and the data availability problem, which is essentially a solution to that, making sure that everybody knows that the data is there so that everybody can run a rollup on top of it and with a rollup full node verify the state and the full history of the blockchain. Great. And a sovereign rollup is simply just that. It just says, hey, I'm posting my blocks to a DA layer, to Celestia, right? But I'm still doing the execution, which every rollup does, and the settlement. That's the difference. I don't run that is exactly the difference of a sovereign rollup between an Ethereum L2 or another L2 in general speaking. It means, hey, I'm just a rollup that posts my block to another chain, Celestia. That's it. End of story. I don't maintain this enshrined L2 bridge or whatnot to a settlement layer like Ethereum. I either have no bridge, right? This very interesting thought experiment. We have a lot of customers who just want one asset, their own asset maybe, like could be their own meme coin, could be their in-game asset. They don't care about any other asset. So they just get that rollup without any bridge, right? The rollup itself issues their native asset, which isn't possible with an L2, at least not in the current form. Usually when you run OP Stack or something else, the bridge comes with it, whether you want it or not, at least in the current configurations, the standard configurations, right? So interesting thought experiment there. But also in general, if you do need bridging, you can pick which bridges should serve your rollup, your ABC sovereign rollup. You can work with layer 0, you can work with Hyperlane, you can work with USDC, any combination thereof, ZK bridging once it comes online in the future, right? So yeah, it's essentially ABC stack is the first Gigagas stack, but it is also the first sort of sovereign EVM sovereign rollup stack that will go mainstream in 2025, I'm sure. And that gives you these nice architectural benefits of having a modular architecture with Celestia, with modular bridging. And you really decouple the chain from the bridging aspect, which the L2 construction couples it. Chain and bridging is sort of goes hand in hand with this ABC sovereign rollup architecture. They're decoupled, which, by the way, also is one of the reasons we were able to breach the Gigagas barrier so quickly, because as it turns out, running an enshrined bridge as part of your rollup client adds a lot of unnecessary overhead that we simply were able to delete there in this construction with ABC stack. So long backdrop to all of that, but I hope
that was
I
great. And I
just
want to go over some of the fundamental things, because we chatted about so many things. So, okay, a rollup essentially is just a virtual blockchain that is essentially using another blockchain for like data availability, and consensus ordering, right? So, listeners, if you got this far, you got this. And then one of the reasons you guys were able to hit the Gigagas barrier is essentially, well, actually, let's first go into this. So rollups are not L2s. Can you describe a little bit about this? It seems like the L2 essentially has an enshrined bridge. It's essentially a standard that Ethereum gave. And by decoupling the bridge from the rollup implementation, you guys have been able to hit the Gigagas barrier, because actually the native bridge implementation is quite inefficient. Are we following that correctly?
Yes, 100%. There's some other things that go into this, but like that aspect, the decoupling of the rollup and the bridging certainly helped a lot, I would say. We have some other optimizations. We will most likely make the code open source in 2025 and so on, so everybody can look it up. Currently, it's not open source yet. I should say that as well. But once we have audits complete and mainnets out and so on, we will, if not open source, then at least source available. We're figuring that out with our business strategy for 2025. But there's some other optimizations. But I would say that ripping out of the enshrined bridge certainly helped a lot. Simply because also the bridge produces fraud proofs and or ZK proofs, and these things are usually specific to a specific implementation of the EVM. So there is even more coupling there, where with APC stack rollup you simply don't have to produce these fraud proofs or ZK proofs. So you can also use any EVM implementation and gain like state of the art performance benefits there. You could also run a parallel EVM and whatnot. So you're just way more flexible because indeed you remove that bridge, that coupling from the rollup itself. And yes, to unpack that again, rollups are not L2s. This is a very important takeaway. Most people think rollups are just L2s, and they're saying no, like L2s are a subset of rollups. L2s are a very specific implementation of a rollup. And I would say the word L2 means, at least in the like how we use it in our industry, it means that the rollup has an enshrined bridge to a settlement layer. Normally, it means the rollup is connected to Ethereum. It's posting state proofs to Ethereum, and the rollup assets are also bridged in from Ethereum. And Ethereum is your escape hatch. Like that's why people initially said, "Oh, a rollup is almost as good as Ethereum. It inherits the security from Ethereum." What does it mean? It actually means that the rollup assets are all custodied in a bridge on Ethereum that the rollup is operating. And if you prove that something is fraudulent or faulty on the rollup, you can use that Ethereum bridge to get your rollup assets out again. That was at least the promise that we were told. In reality, it looks very, very different to that. In reality today, even the poster children, if you look on L2B TVL, like Arbitrum, Base, and Optimism, only have about a third or so of their TVL in the rollup bridge. The other 2/3 are either coming from completely external bridges, like let's say Wormhole, Socket, Layer 0, whatever, right? Which is it's a proprietary third-party system that Ethereum technically has nothing to do with per se, unless they write their smart contracts in a very immutable way. But normally there's some sort of bridging oracle or attestation service and even upgradable smart contracts. So it's really not that fraud-proof equivalent style Ethereum bridge that Rollups really envisaged here. So that definitely is not fulfilling the L2 vision that people had, and even more so the native assets issued on something like Base. Another like third or even more of the assets on Base are natively issued on Base, so Ethereum doesn't even have them, right? It has no liquidity for them. It doesn't even know them. So of course Ethereum can't bail you out if something goes wrong on the rollup. So actually this was one of the reasons where initially when learning about sovereign rollups, I got confused, but then doing Rollup-as-a-Service for 2 years and seeing so many customers, our own customers, like Rhea, for example, is using Socket almost entirely for all of their chains TVL. They run a perp DEX chain with Gelato. And seeing that in action really made me question again, like the current way of doing L2s. And that's when I realized, hey, wait a second. Like L2s are all about this bridge and no one is using the bridge. And by the way, why are people not using it? First of all, because it's only bidirectional. It only connects your chain, your L2 to Ethereum. Often you want to also be connected to other chains, right? So you need some solution there. And secondly, the bridge has this huge inefficiency, at least for fraud proofs, where it takes 7 days to process withdrawals from your rollup. And this is abstracted mostly from users. Even if you use something like a cross with a canonical bridged asset, where you would actually technically get the asset that is bridged from Ethereum, it is a cross that abstracts this latency for you. They give you a loan, essentially like a quick, more like a quick line of credit, right? Like or really like a liquidity provision, I should call it. And they then hide and handle this complexity. And let me tell you, Hard and other, like all these guys that are trying to work around the 7-day withdrawal period, that's a huge headache for them. It's usually capital inefficient. And all of them are just, waiting for faster bridges to be able to scale to that many rollups. So yeah, the way I would think about ABC rollups instead is you could almost think of them as L1s. If you're a builder, building with OP Stack, for example, you're building an L2 chain, and your token, if you use a token for gas, like a custom gas token, which many customers want as well, you basically have an L2 sort of style gas or governance token. Versus if you build with ABC, it's more like you're building your own L1, your own sovereign, app or sovereign L1. There's no Ethereum in the picture. You're not scaling Ethereum, right? If you don't care about that at all, you're not connecting to Ethereum if you don't want to connect there. Of course, you can still connect there if you want with Layer 0 or whomever else. You're building more like an L1, I would say. Although, of course, you're still posting your blocks to Celestia for data availability. That settlement aspect is removed. Your rollup itself can do native issuance. Your token is like an L1 token. You can have your own rollup issue your own token, simply similar to how Ethereum issues ETH or Bitcoin issues BTC. You can literally make your token into a blockchain cryptocurrency instead of just an ERC20 smart contract that is bridged in, right? Which I think many folks find very appealing. So you're a bit more sovereign in that regard. This L1 analogy falls a bit apart if you think from the perspective of the DA layer, which is also a layer 1 there, right? Like if you think from the perspective of DA and consensus finalization, then yes, you're still a Celestia layer 2 of sorts, but from the perspective of settlement, which is more commonly used to describe L2s, then you're more like an L1 that settles that has its own settlement guarantees, essentially.
Yeah, and I just want to do another summary. Essentially, the sovereign rope idea is that we're decoupling the bridge, because what you essentially saw, and historically the narrative was, hey, if you're building an L2, then essentially Ethereum is kind of like FDIC insurance. It's going to insure you up to a certain amount of assets, provided that they're used with that Ethereum bridge. However, we know that most chains actually use like a wormhole or some kind of cross-chain compatibility solution. So most of those assets aren't even, really guaranteed by Ethereum itself. So what you guys did was you've now decoupled the bridging, because most people aren't even using the native bridge, and there's that 7-day period that causes a lot of headaches for developers. So you've essentially said like, hey, the security on most of these L2s isn't even as good as advertised. So we're just going to essentially decouple the bridge and allow people to create their own L1 using consensus ordering, data availability, and settlement on Celestia. Does that about cover it?
Perfect summary. And let me also tell you, I think L2 marketing, especially from the Ethereum side, and marketing, marketing has to be appealing and so on. So I'm not hating on marketing. We do our own marketing, which isn't always exact, I would say, right? Like to technical specification. But I think what the L2 marketing sort of what misguidedness and falsehoods it installed in people's minds is that you automatically, by doing an L2, you're like inheriting security from Ethereum. You don't at all. Like you have to use the L2 in a very specific way to even inherit that security. And let me remind you that up until very recently, Base didn't even have fraud proofs, right? Like, and to this day, like stage 1, whatever that means, but like people were using this stuff with billions of TVL without any fraud-proof system even being there, ergo no security, even if used properly, being there at all, right? So I think it's all a bit of a meme. In reality, yes, developers and users, they want security, but they don't want to trade it off too much against speed and UX, right? And right now, the optimistic rollups, at least, they force you into a massive trade-off with speed and UX. Even if that is abstracted for you by someone like across, they are still paying the cost of it, right? So you will notice either by less tokens being available on the bridge or whatever else it is, or across serving less rollups, right? So that's very important to know, is like, this is not so much about you get something for free, you get security from Ethereum for free. No, like you have to make a specific choice, and usually there's a trade-off. And what I notice with the developers and customers that are using Gelato's Rollup-as-a-Service platform is that they have opinions about what they want to build, and then they want to make choices, right? And ABC Stack, essentially, it gives you like that choice, right, without enshrining any specific implementation, that when you end up not using it, it's just there for nothing, and it's causing a lot of costs for nothing. Like right now, we literally have a lot of rollups running that have this L2 enshrined bridge. They're slow because of it, they're paying settlement because of it, and they're not using it. And that's just, that's just dumb. It shouldn't be like that, right? So yeah, it gives you that choice to design your rollup in a modular way. That's why we call it modular bridging. If you need assets to be bridged in from elsewhere, you will still need a bridge, and you will still have to make that choice. And ultimately, is layer 0 secure enough for your use case? Completely depends on how you configure layer 0, right? Like, sure. I would say so. For most use cases, people like Aave is using Chainlink oracles, and Chainlink is just a multisig, and you can turn your layer 0 also in just a multisig, right? So if Chainlink is good enough for Aave, the biggest like lending market on Ethereum, then a good layer 0 configuration should also be, or hyperlink configuration should also be good enough for your use case, I would say, right? But of course, ABC Stack is also forward compatible with ZK. So once ZK bridging comes online, that's also going to work, and that might be the best solution in the end game, right? And also, by the way, I mentioned a lot these 7-day withdrawal issues that OP Stack and Arbitrum have. By the way, this is not saying that right now ZK EVMs or ZK rollup stacks are better. Not at all. Like, ZK rollups for me are not production ready. Their proving costs and latencies are insanely high. So I definitely think that OP and Arbitrum made the right move to enter the market with optimistic technology. ZK was simply not ready. It's people always say this time it's ready. I'm willing to wait a bit longer after having a ZK stack in production last year and really going through a lot of pain with it. I'm now willing to wait it out a bit, but maybe in 2025, end of the year, ZK proving costs and latencies will finally be good enough to actually consider them for production use. And at which point, the optimistic fraud-proof systems will probably eventually become stale, and they will be replaced by ZK systems. And of course, just because OP started with fraud proofs doesn't mean they can't also do ZK. Of course, they will also do ZK and so on, right? Just for the listener just wanted to make that clear. Like, I'm actually very, very bullish on the go-to-market approach of OP and Arbitrum. I think they did the right thing there.
Yeah, and I remember hearing the founder of Arbitrum say the same thing, where he's like, "Hey, we don't have optimism in our name." Obviously, throwing shade at optimism, but he's talking about like, "Hey, when ZK comes and is effective, we'll obviously add it in where needed." Now, you talked a little bit about some of the ZK issues in a previous podcast that I listened to. Talk to us, because you mentioned you had your own ZK chain. What were some of the issues that you personally ran into?
Yes, so actually we launched our Rollup-as-a-Service with Astar, and Astar wanted a Polygon ZK EVM back then. And we actually moved them to production, even though there were already some warnings before. But the customer really, really wanted to launch the chain. They had a migration there going on. So we launched it nonetheless. And it essentially, ultimately, this was specific to the version which now has been deprecated of Polygon CDK, but that just had a lot of issues in it. There was that, but overall the more general issues, I believe, with ZK EVMs and so on, where overall the code complexity, possible bugs, slowness. So I like, personally, I definitely think this first wave of ZK EVMs has failed, and I don't think it will come back. Polygon and is also shifting, I think, to another model like the Type 1 prover model. I can't go into the specifics there, but I can just say I think it's a bit more akin to what Succinct does with their SP1, ZK EVM proving, and maybe Rest Zero as well. Roughly speaking, I think people are going away from trying to write the EVM in like a ZK circuit, and they're going more to a model where you compile your EVM client, let's say your REST client, you compile that to a ZK VM circuit like the SP1, which I think people call Type 1 provers, where the first versions of ZK EVMs have been more like Type 2 or even Type 3 provers. I think some people call ZK Stack a Type 3 thing. So yeah, I think the first versions, 2 years ago, everybody was hyping them up, but now it's pretty obvious that they failed. And now all teams are probably trying new versions. And eventually, I think there will be something that is good enough. So the main issues, though, with ZK in general for ZK VMs is just the proving costs and the proving time. They were just insane, especially compared to optimistic stacks where they're basically zero, because you only have to do something once there is fraud detection, right? So yeah, I mean, ZK has a lot of costs, and now the question is just how quickly will these costs come down, both in terms of latency and actual dollars that you spend for running this hardware, the ZK hardware. And that we're just waiting for software improvements, right? Like I think SP1, for example, from Succinct is great, like has great software improvements, but also hardware acceleration is apparently coming to market for ZK provers this year, or I should say 2025. And that's what people are waiting for. That should help a lot. But ultimately, I think people make the mistake to always think that they always need ZK. So we had some use cases who essentially, I would say, fell for the ZK branding. They thought, oh, ZK just sounds so great. It's the future. I'm going to use it. But ZK just gives you a very specific thing. First of all, scalability. But I would say this you don't need so much anymore in the context of ABC stack, where you get so much Gigagas already, right? Like so ultimately, ZK came from an era where you try to fit something on Ethereum mainnet, and Ethereum mainnet is extremely resource constrained. So you had all of these ZK co-processors and whatnot that said, oh, we can run this computation off-chain, post a proof of it on Ethereum, and now you can run your app off-chain and sort of have it be verified on Ethereum and pay very little gas for it on Ethereum. That's great. But if your app is already running on ABC Stack, you don't need that. And ABC Stack gives you all the throughput you probably need. So you don't need ZK for scalability anymore in that setting. So why is ZK still then, and even if you have all the throughput you need without ZK already on ABC, why would it still be useful? Well, the next thing it's useful for is interoperation, interop with different chains. And essentially what I would say ZK bridging is ultimately the end game here. There you can have, instead of going for a hyperlane or layer 0 multisig model, you can now have a compute essentially mathematically beautiful futuristic tech provable model where it's like, okay, I can do bridging with other chains, and it doesn't work because the layer 0 servers or my whoever is running the attestation servers are secure. No, it works because of cryptography, right? And that is of course awesome for security reasons, but I think also for everything we design at Gelato is in the pursuit of one-click features. So right now, if you want to get a secure bridge multisig online, like Hyperlane or Layer 0, there's a lengthy process. You need to talk to them. You need a bunch of infrastructure providers to coordinate and come online. Versus with the ZK, once it's ready, this is technically just software, so it's one-click deployable. So I think it's not just because of the security purity of it, but also because the barrier to entry is massively lower because it's just like one click, much easier than with a multisig setup. Technically, we're working on also getting Hyperlane multisigs and Layer 0 multisigs one clickable, but there it's much more unelegant. Like we have to coordinate with all of these parties. We have to build APIs and handshake protocols between all of these parties to get the system online. With ZK bridging, you don't need all of that anymore. So yeah, that's what I would say about ZK there.
Yeah, so for listeners that are unfamiliar, or maybe people that have never used Gelato themselves, talk to us a little bit about so with the sovereign rollup, we can essentially pick, Celestia. Actually, Celestia, that choice is already made. We can pick the bridge. Talk to us a little bit about the one-click choices that somebody gets when they go into the abundance stack, or like what kind of configurations can they select when they go into Gelato?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I think the most important thing to know is if you don't care about scaling Ethereum and you want to build an app, right? Like let me even back up a bit. So first of all, if you're building a serious application nowadays, you should already not even consider, but I think you should already deploy it as an app chain. I mean, you've seen the success of Hyperliquid. Hyperliquid actually we built all of the infrastructure themselves, and I think you can much more easily compete with them nowadays by using a Rollup-as-a-Service provider like Gelato, and you don't have to sort of roll your own infra like they did. I think they were a bit early, right? We also talked to them, and they had some customizations they want to do, which I believe are all more or less available on Gelato Rollup-as-a-Service today already, especially with ABC Stack, things like configuring your sequencer to have Oracle updates at the top of the block or priority lanes and so on, account abstraction. All of this we have available today, or if not today, very soon. So first of all, if you are building a serious DeFi application, game, whatever it is, you should definitely build an app chain. And I think app chains will be huge, also for tokens, for your token, like Hype has shown. And you can focus on your product. You don't have to build all of the infrastructure that Hyperliquid did. You can literally use Gelato for that, right? So first things first, you should have an app chain. And major reason being that especially during bull markets, you have congestion problems on shared chains like Ethereum or other chains, or even Solana, right? You have this noisy neighbor problem that you never know, right? Like even if now on Solana your app is doing fine, you never know what will happen once the limits of the network are reached again. And that really sucks. If you have a great exchange or product and you ever have one of these phases where your fees suddenly like are asymptotically higher, or your users complain because they can't get placed trades within like 2 or 3 days because the network is just so congested, then it'll be a bit too late to change to an app chain. And you'll be like, oh, fuck, I should have gone for an app chain, right? So you should start with an app chain. Why? Because that's obviously also the state that web has eventually, evolutionized to, where it evolved to where nowadays everybody deploys the application on AWS as a sort of separate virtual machine. Similarly, you should deploy your on-chain app as a separate rollup. I already called Rollup virtual servers before. You can stick with that analogy for now. So when you build an app chain, you need you then just need to ask, do you care about scaling Ethereum with your rollup? Yes, if you really do, then arguably you should become a Ethereum pristine rollup using OP Stack or Arbitrum, right? Or any of the ZK stacks once they're ready. If you don't care about scaling Ethereum, if you just care about your application and business and so on, then I think ABC is perfect for you because you get so many advantages with it. You get like the high throughput performance is in general. If you care about high throughput, if you want to bring your users on chain like gaming and so on, you'll very quickly reach the limits of the current L2 stack. So with ABC, you just have that 100x more like throughput, right? So yeah, and then once you have your ABC stack chain, if you care about decentralization, if you want to be an unstoppable application, like a true sort of DeFi application, you care about censorship resistance, then you will use ABC stack with Celestia, because Celestia ultimately gives you that censorship resistance and security that Gelato alone with ABC stack wouldn't be able to give you, because it's still just a centralized sequencer. So with using Celestia SDA, you can make sure that your chain is sort of visible by every node, and that even if you want to get rid of Gelato at some point, or if Gelato goes out of business, you can continue the chain and everybody can agree on what the correct state is. So that's very, very, very important if you care about decentralization. If you don't care about decentralization and you sort of trust Gelato, then you can also use ABC stack with the Gelato DSC. This is similar to what we do with Arbitrum AnyTrust, where essentially your chain data is stored on our server nodes and not on Celestia. Celestia might still keep a copy of the hashes of each block for data integrity purposes, but not for data availability purposes. This is a common construction, especially pioneered by Arbitrum, and that is commonly used nowadays. So yeah, once you've made that choice, let's say you are now an unstoppable perp DEX that uses ABC and Celestia, right? Now you essentially we make available to you the suite of Gelato services like relaying. Functions is like a serverless event-driven framework, which I mean, Raya, for example, a perp DEX uses both. And now also coming to market very soon are our sequencer customization plugins. So this is especially for perp DEXs is interesting things like, hey, I want my Oracle provider to initialize their price feeds at the top of every block. That's very important for MEV resistance. Or I want to have a special priority lane for liquidations, if, for example, or I want this EIP 7702 account abstraction thing to work. All of this we have available. Or like we also with ABC have literal zero gas rollup, so no transaction fees. I think that's awesome. Like I think transaction fees should be zero actually for most use cases. But then you need a rate limiter to prevent spam and so on. So maybe you have a pluggable thing with your rollup where you say, hey, these power users get like, I don't know, thousands of transactions per day. But some smaller users, like maybe users that are on the free tier or something, they only get like 3 transactions per hour or so, right? Like, so all of these customizations, if we don't have them available, you can, like, we will talk to you, you can explain your use case, and then we will make that available in no time for you. And then there's many more. We have the third-party ecosystem, right? Like we work with the best bridging, like messaging providers, Layer 0, Hyperlane, Socket, you name it, right? Across all of them. The block explorers, the indexers like GoldSky, every piece of infrastructure or user onboarding software or whatever it is that you need, we probably already have available today. And if not, but I think by now we have everything you need. But if not, then we're usually very quick to enable any vendor that you need on your chain. So that's the sort of process that you go through. All of this you get on a one-click testnet and soon also mainnets. So you can just start testing without talking much to us. You can already deploy your application on testnet, benchmark, see whether we're actually truthful about the Gigagas or not. Find out yourself, right? You take it from there, and then we are there to make it as easy and as for you to get all of this infrastructure and not think about it. And what you should focus on is not the infra, it is your use case and your application, right? And I implore you to actually build an app chain. There's so many general purpose L2s already. So just build an app chain, build it. Don't be afraid to build an app and try it. I believe that will pay off massively in 2025. Hype has sort of led the way there, but I think VCs and in general the space will value apps much higher than it did in the past, and you will really have an edge over more general infrastructure plays as a pure application developer. I hope to see more of them in 2025, and I think the market will reward that behavior.
Yeah, and I just want to summarize real quick. So essentially, you have two top level decisions, and I'm sure that actually a graphic would be great for this. Is do you want to scale Ethereum? Do you not want to scale Ethereum? If you do want to scale Ethereum, hey, you're probably going to go down the like OP lane or the Arbitrum solution.
If you want to scale Ethereum, I think
you want to scale Ethereum.
Yes.
If you don't particularly care about scaling Ethereum, then you have two decisions. Do you really care about decentralization? Is decentralization like the unstoppable app, the uncensorship? Then you're definitely going to pick Celestia. If not, there's other solutions you can pick. And then after you've picked that solution, then you get into bridging, the oracles, the different kind of add-ons, the functions as a service. Is that about right in terms of the kind of decision matrix people make when they're using the abundance stack?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and it's a bit of a meme to start with, like, do you want to scale Ethereum or not? Like, I think most people should even start. Like, it's because the current space is still so indoctrinated from Ethereum and L2s. Like I said in the beginning of, right, like we went through it in this episode, where essentially people still equate L2s and rollups, like think that they are the same thing, but no, like L2s are very specific to Ethereum, I would say, implementation of a rollup, which I argue nowadays is misplaced for a lot of use cases. This is just what I've seen with our customers, right? This is not me making this up. This is me being in the market with real customers complaining about things or not being able to deploy an application the way that they want to deploy or run it, right? So ultimately, I would hope that at some point people stop approaching the question even with Ethereum at the very top level. It should be more like, what do you want to build? How much throughput do you need? Do you want to have zero fees? Do you want to have MEV, this and that, right? Like, this is how you should design your application, completely irrespective of Ethereum. But nowadays, given that so many people in the space are still in this echo chamber and they're still very influenced by Ethereum thinking, it's like, this is a maybe a fun meme way to start. Like, do you want to scale Ethereum or not? Because a lot of people I talk to, they also really actually want to build an application, but they're still so influenced by Ethereum marketing that they think the only way to get what they need is to use Ethereum L2s, which often then it turns out isn't later on in the process, right? Like, then, like, they for example, like, people come, they think they're an Ethereum L2, and then they tell us they don't want to use the bridge and they just want to use socket. And then I'm like, wait a second. So you pick the Ethereum L2 stack and you're not really going to use what it's designed for. All right. Okay. So here's where often people, like, if you're not, and I don't blame them. We are supposed to explain this stuff and abstract this complexity of infrastructure for you. Not everybody should be a RAS provider to build an application and understand the quirks, right? But nowadays, what I really realized is a lot of people approach the infrastructure topic with a lot of misguidedness and misunderstandings about how the infrastructure actually works underneath.
So it seems like your overall thesis is that kind of most things will be an app chain at the end of the day. I'm curious, based off that, what you think about, like, if you've seen any of the work of like Solana network extensions, or if you're looking at like something like Monad or Mega ETH that are trying to be very performant, like L1s. Do you think that, they will be largely successful, or do you think, like, hey, it's really the app providers, the app chains, like, there's not as much a need to focus on this like L1 infrastructure?
It's a good question. In some parts, I've been extremely bearish on the monolithic approach that Solana has taken. And this is obviously also from me being in the Ethereum space for such a long time, since 2016, and seeing Ethereum take that road and then pivoting away from it for very good reasons, right? This is also why I'm so bullish on Celestia, because for me, Celestia is essentially has this massive second mover advantage versus Ethereum, where they're essentially on the same path as Ethereum is now with the Rollup-centric roadmap, but they don't have all of the technical depth of having to justify an L1 with a smart contracts EVM and contradicting yourself all the time, whether it's important or not to have the L1 and what to even do with it. And then also the revenues and the token and the burn and whatnot. Like, Celestia is free, unburdened of what has been, right? And they can just go ahead and solve the DA problem and essentially build the best platform for rollups. Like, so that's why I'm so bullish on Celestia. But the question, like, what's at the other end of the spectrum? Like, Ethereum is somewhere in the middle, moving towards where Celestia is on the right end. If the right is modular and left is monolithic. So the way I look at Solana now is, first of all, I'm really bullish on Toli as a founder. I think for me, he replaced Vitalik in many regards, in the, like, as a voice that I listened to in the last year. I think he has many good and right takes. So I wouldn't fade Toli and Solana, never. I'm sometimes confused as to, like, why would they're obviously smart, so why would they sort of go this monolithic way and so on. And I think the way I would describe it is actually, I think Solana is building the right thing. It is building this globally decentralized, super fast and super like the high increased bandwidth, low reduced latency protocol for essentially having fast inclusion into a blockchain, in a shared blockchain globally. They sometimes call this decentralized NASDAQ, and I agree with that. However, what I don't agree with is sometimes Solana also still comes from, I mean, obviously heavily influenced by Ethereum in its origins, right? And they still describe themselves, and they're still being described as a general smart contracting platform. And similar probably for Monad. And I think on this, I would be somewhat bearish, because I'm more bullish on app chains. I think, like, applications should run, should have the infrastructure, period. And there's not much place in the far future for, like, these sort of shared infrastructure platforms, I believe. However, if you squint a little, like I didn't do, and if I look at Solana, at what they describe themselves, decentralized NASDAQ, and I would say if Solana becomes an application-specific chain, then I think what they're building is really great. If you think of it as a rollup, like you could even turn Solana into a rollup, and their whole consensus engine and what they're building there just becomes the decentralized sequencing layer of that rollup, then I think Solana would be one of the coolest rollups or chains in general out there. And you would still not only have one of them, you would probably have 4 or 5 Solanas or maybe 10, and they would each be the big killer apps that crypto will come up with, right? The next global BlackRock or the next global NASDAQ, right? Each of these killer apps, of which there will only be a handful, might look a bit like what Solana is building. And Solana might run the first of them. Maybe Solana really is the next NASDAQ, the first global one with super low latencies. And on this, I would be bullish, right? But for that, they have to change the narrative a bit away from we're competing with Ethereum the way it has been, and more to, hey, we're actually building, we're actually competing with TradFi. I think that would make me very bullish. But in a way, engineering wise, they're on that same path. So I'm bullish on it. They just have to update the marketing.
So just 2 final questions. You've been super generous with your time. One is we always ask for a startup idea from any of the guests. So what do you think is an area of the blockchain ecosystem that is either, under-resourced, or you're like, if I wasn't working on Gelato, I think this is a very good opportunity because we have a lot of builders in the network?
I think a lot of the stuff that Solana is trying to solve is really cool. They also now put on their roadmap multiple concurrent leaders, they call it, which I think is basically similar, maybe adapted, I don't know, but I would probably think that Toli already thought of it before. But Max Resnick, the Ethereum researcher from Mechanism Group or whatever it's called, he has this Ethereum braid proposal, multiple concurrent proposals. So this is a very specific technical feature that I'm very interested in. It's essentially saying that right now you always have this issue with proposer builder separation, or in general that even if the blockchain is decentralized, at any given slot you have a single producer of a block that has sort of monopoly rights over it. I actually thought about this very early on in my software career in Ethereum already. I have like an old tweet from many years ago where I was talking, where I had this realization, and I was talking about how that is a problem. But yeah, essentially multiple concurrent proposers or leaders is trying to fix that, where people can maintain this database worldwide, but they don't always have to follow a leader in sequence. They can sort of include transactions into the database locally and still have it go into the global standard, which I think is that's the end game. This is also why Toli, I think, has it after Firedance and so on. He says he wants to work on this. So this is one specific blockchain problem that I would be interested in. Apart from that, I actually think, even though it's I usually AI and so on is always a bit of a meme and it's a bit like a grift and whatnot, but I actually think AI agents are quite interesting. Just operationally speaking, we have the spin-out project of Gelato called Arrakis, which is doing on-chain sort of market making. It's wildly successful as well. It's actually one of the most slept on teams in DeFi. But even last week I checked, and their Arrakis hot AMM is doing something like 25% or so of the ETH USDC volume on CowSwap, is really coming close to Wintermute there in terms of dominance, using a completely different model than Wintermute's private market maker. And yeah, so there I think AI agents like AI will play just giving AI models bank accounts on chain that they can permissionlessly use and permissionless finance and so on, I think it's just a nice sort of combination. So I would be interested in that as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of exciting things. We just interviewed the CEO, the founder of Hyperbolic, and he thinks we're going to get to AGI in 5 years. So we all may have to be paying all our crypto to AGI soon. But talk to us a little bit about where people can learn more about the Abundance Stack, where they can find you and interact with you online.
Yeah, so as a developer, if you want to deploy that, first place to start is ras.gelato.network. I'm just going to caveat that we will probably rebrand very soon to gelato.cloud, away from gelato.network. So if you're listening to this episode in a month from now or so, that rebrand might have already happened. But it's either ras.gelato.network or ras.gelato.cloud. In general, gelato.network, or in the future, gelato.cloud. On Twitter, you will find us at Gelato Network, and myself at Luis, LUIS_0x. And of course, Abundance has a separate account on Twitter that's at Abundance_XYZ. Abundance is essentially the entity behind the ABC stack. And there's going to be many more things coming from Abundance. Next year, we will have many nice announcements, and it will all also tie back into Gelato. So yeah, 2025 is the year that we bring Abundance to the space.
Very exciting. Well, everyone go get involved with Luis, go get involved with both those Twitter accounts. I'll put the links in the description, and let's continue building the future of on-chain.